Namaste, Jai Bharat. Let me think in terms of one irony at least. There are many ironies in this world. You must have heard the name of Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci was an Italian, Sardinian basically, and a communist leader who was imprisoned in his life for quite some time. And during his stay in prison, he wrote that book which became quite popular in the neo-Marxist circles. That is Quaderni, he writes, the original name, which was translated into English as Prison Notes. So in Prison Notes, suppose to have written during his imprisoned times, and he was writing about Marxism, Marx, etc. So he wanted, it seems, this is what it seems, he was afraid of the censorships in prison, so he did not use the name Marx explicitly or directly. He used the name, instead of calling Marx, he called him as a philosopher of 20th century. That's what. Then secondly, instead of calling Marxism, he used another disguised name, philosophy of praxis. This is what I would like to talk about, philosophy of praxis. By calling philosophy of praxis, Gramsci implies it's a philosophy of practice or practical philosophy, juxtaposing to other philosophies which are implied to be not very practical or not at all practical. So for him, Marxism is the only practical philosophy. He calls Marxism as philosophy of praxis. So there are many indirect references are there in the book of Antonio Gramsci, the Prison Notes. Not a very small book, at the same time not also a very large book. It's a big book, big enough book. It takes time to read, and good reading, and undoubtedly you can read through it without much of hindrance. There's a good flow. And he talks about so many things in Prison Notes. He talks about catharsis, he talks about hegemony, all those things. So many things. He's a genuine person, undoubtedly. Gramsci is a genuine person. But the point is, he calls the most fantastic, in the sense based on fantasy theory, as philosophy of praxis. Marxism is absolutely not at all practical. It has nothing to do with practical, but it claims to be the philosophy of practice. They call it as praxis in a modern, in a stylish, jargonistic manner. So what is so practical in Marxism? People think it's very practical, or people are made to think it is practical, mostly because they don't go beyond the surface level Marxism to deep Marxism. I make a distinction between surface level Marxism and deep Marxism. Surface level Marxism is that which appeals to you through the words of others, through the tongues of others, through the perceptions of others, which comes to you rather easily, which comes to you rather instinctively, especially in the university departments and classes where the professor speaks. And deep Marxism is what you really go dig in through reading by yourselves, find out. When you read also, you must have an obsessionless mind to read Marx. That is, don't read Marx with a fetishized ideas that this is the most perfect thing I'm going to read. No. You read it neutrally, then you will get very fast. You go through all his theories and say how practical they are, or has it anything to do with being practical. The first edifice of Marx itself goes wrong because he builds up his theory on the basis of goodness of human being. It's implied, it's understood that Marx has to believe in the essential goodness of man, otherwise he won't be able to build up his theory of Marxism. See, for instance, I'll just give you this example alone, not much. Marx talks about a situation where there is no ruler and no ruled. Just think about it. There is no ruler and there is no ruled. If there is a ruler, then the ruler has to create rules to rule, and there should be the people who are getting ruled. But then he speaks about the situation in his 1845 economic and philosophical manuscripts, he talks about the situation where man has an essentially inner law of reason. He says that man has an inner law of reason essentially, and there is an inner law of reason in every human being. This is where he makes a mistake to understand man, the human's nature. Man has an inner law of reason, and he envisages, look at the fantasy he makes. Suppose the objective law in the state, or objective law of the state, is one with the inner law of reason of man, then there will be no contradiction between the objective law, state law, and the inner law of reason of a man. And once there is no contradiction or conflict between the inner law of reason and the objective law, there is no need to be a ruler and a ruled. A ruler need not to be necessary, rules are not necessary, so there will be no one ruled. So there is no ruler, there is no ruled, and there are no rules. This is one fantasy. Just one example. You can find it so many examples. Is it anywhere near practical? Just think. Is it really the case? Then look at his class theory, which people celebrate a lot, his class theory. Is it really the case that there are two classes, especially with two classes, basically the proletariat class and the bourgeoisie class, and an in-between funny buffer class called as petit bourgeoisie? Is it really the case? Have you ever seen any society in this manner? You look at any of his theories of Marx, then he talks about 5 epochs in history. Is it really the case that we can really make watertight compartments of epochs in history? Then he tries to speak through the dialectical, materialistic dialectics, the movement from one to another, one to another, one to another, to the point of revolution. Dialectics works interestingly. After revolution, dialectics will cease to exist. Then the progress will be based on another principle called as self-criticism and self-criticism and so on. All these theories are just fantasies, just very, very romantic. He envisages, he dreams, like many dreamers do. Speculative philosophy basically, and people are, especially European philosophers, are speculative. This is just speculative philosophy, and this attracted many people. Of course, it used to attract people, especially even now, younger days. When we were in the universities, my God, this used to be the in thing in the classrooms where people were attracted, and it is very, very fashionable to be pro-communists and speaking about Marx and big thinkers and big names and quoting as though they are very holy verses. Unfortunate, and also fortunate that you can think about it later in life, these things. So philosophy of praxis is actually the most impracticable thing, which has nothing to do with practice, because all these things are fantasies. All these things are basically fundamentally wonderful imaginations, very wonderful imaginations, which can really influence young mind which is not so mature, and it never influences a matured mind. And there are one grown up, matured, aged Marxists in the world is only because for their convenience, or they're already in the trap and can't come out and can negate themselves. Negation of negation, as Marx says. So, not Marx, Comfort, Maurice Comfort speaks about it. Negations of negations. Anyway, they can't self-negate, and they continue to cling to Marxian old jargons and still remain in the dreamy land. Lot of it is, of course. Lot of it is. We'll speak again, we'll see again with some other thoughts in subsequent times. Till then, Namaste, Jai Bharat and Jai Shri Ram.